Hi everyone, welcome to another painting tutorial from Promethean Paints. Today we're going to be painting the Aqshian Pyrocaster from Cities with Sigmar. Comes with his own little flame, so no need to buy any additional flamey bits for this. Built him as per the standard instructions, but I did do sort of a sub-assembly on him, so I've kept him away from the base first of all. So I've attached the flame to the base and then kept him separately just so we can use the airbrush without having to worry about hitting the model itself. Primed the model in black and then went over it with just some AK Tenebrous Grey. The flame I then painted completely in AK Intense White, but any white will do. I like AK Intense White. It is pretty rigid colour, and only a couple of coats are needed to cover a black or really dark grey. So moving straight to the airbrush, I'm using the Liquitex White Ink. A tiny drop of thinner in there, very, very small, just to keep it from drying out too much on the needle. And what we're doing now is we're creating the gradient that we're going to apply our fluorescent colours over. So at the moment, how we're sort of looking at it is where it's the most intense white is where it's the most hottest or brightest, and where it fades away is where it's darker or cooler. So like the glow from the fire will be darker the further out it goes. So what we're going to be doing is going from bright yellow on the very bottom of the flame up to Tenebrous Grey, very darkness on the back. I'm also now going to be doing because I'm going to be using contrast paints through the airbrush as well. I'm now just doing almost a sort of zenithal highlight of the sort of main cloak areas, not his cloak. This is sort of like his robe, which is an orange colour, like a fiery orange colour, matching the box art. So what I'm doing here is I'm pointing the airbrush directly down. So as you can see, I'm pointing the airbrush sort of downwards so that it's hitting the top of the model, so that the brighter point is where the most intense colour will be. And then when you do this zenithal type highlight, it's almost like if you were dry brushing from the top and going downwards. You catch the leading edge, the top edges, but leave what's below that in a type of shadow, and you just get a little bit of overspray in those areas just so it picks up the colour. I'm hitting the robe at the moment, but don't worry about that, you don't need to do that on this bit. I was just seeing what it looked like and where the volumes would be on the robe, but we do all that with brushwork in a bit. I wanted the colours fairly muted on the model just so that the flame stood out, and I'm not going to be doing any OSL on this, so I don't want any of the heat or light from the fire to be reflecting on the model itself, because some of the box art that I saw in the codexes and stuff for this guy, and the artwork that Warhammer have done, didn't really show that the light was reflecting on him that much. So I imagine that as he's a pyrocaster, he's almost immune to the heat and the glow of the flame. So once you've done your zenithal highlight, we then move on to applying the contrast paint, and this is the Citadel Magmadroth flame, which is a nice orange colour. It's a little bit of red in it, but it's a nice deep orange. And all I do here is just very carefully, I've not thinned this down, just take your time with the airbrush and just apply this over all of the white that we've just done, and the shadows as well. So just cover all of the cloak with this Magmadroth flame. Once it's dry, well actually we can leave it to dry because we're now going to move over to the flame. We're going to start off with AK Fluorescent Yellow. This is all through the airbrush, and all I'm doing here is I'm pretty much coating everything that we've done white and in the entire base in the fluorescent yellow. I have added a little drop of water in with this. The fluorescent paints can be quite thick, they're very pigment heavy, so I've applied a little bit of water and given it a good stir. in the airbrush, and now it's just short sharp bursts through the airbrush, and then I apply this maybe 3-4 coats as it goes on quite wet. So leave it time to dry between coats, and then just apply it and apply it and apply it until you get a pure glow. You will see that it's actually looking a bit green. I have no idea how the science of this works, but the fluorescent yellow, when applied straight away like this, it looks slightly green. But we're going to be applying oranges and reds in a minute, which will turn this yellow. So don't worry about that, don't freak out. It will go back to a yellow once we've applied some other colours. So clean your airbrush out and now apply some AK Fluorescent Orange into the airbrush. Again, a little drop of water. If you don't want to add water to thin it down, you can always add the fluorescent inks by Daler and Rowney, or just any fluorescent ink by Daler and Rowney. What I'm doing here is I'm focusing the airbrush primarily in the sort of top 2/3, but I do cover the base in that pure yellow at the very bottom. I do just add a little bit of orange to it, but you see I'm pointing the airbrush downwards so that we leave a little bit of that yellow showing, but then I make sure that all the other areas are almost fully covered in the fluorescent orange. So this is almost like we did with the zenithal highlight, where we want to catch the raised edges, and we want to make sure that we fully coat where the flame is cooling down to be more orange, which is more towards the top. You can already see now, it's hard to sometimes capture these fluorescents on the camera because the lighting I use, it bounces back quite a lot and goes pure white. But you can already see we've turned that yellow that was looking green into a nice intense yellow with a glowing orange. Next step would be for using some Green Stuff World Fluorescent Red. Again, a couple of drops in the airbrush, 1 drop of water just to thin it out ever so slightly. And now this is where I'm making sure now the area that's behind the flame there, sort of the area that's closest to my finger, that will be more red because that's further away. So the further away from that intenseness we've got at the base of the flame, the source is now turning redder. Applying this red has the effect of cooling it, but also adding an intensity of heat. It's quite weird how that works with this fluorescent red, but I find that when I add this, the glow intensifies even though we're darkening it down. So make sure you cover those tips, covering that orange at the very top, and that back part of the area of the base where obviously it's going to be a lot cooler. And the next step, we actually add some red ink. It is optional, you don't have to do this if you don't want to, but I find that adding the red ink just helps knock it back a little bit. But I don't clean the airbrush, I just add the red ink directly into the pot of the airbrush, and it just mixes in with the fluorescent red and just helps maintain a little bit of that glowing red effect, but does darken it and cool it down a little bit. So here we are with the Vallejo Red Ink. Any red ink will do. I just use the Vallejos. They came in a pack, all of their inks that I got. So as you can see, I'm just aiming it now into the back part of the base where it cools it down. It's a very subtle effect here, but it does work. And all I'm doing now is aiming it, again, pointing downwards, but at the very tips where the flame will be cooler and turning into a black smoke. And again, the next step is I add some AK Tenebrous Grey into the pot with a couple of drops of water, but I don't wash it out, so that we get a sort of a dark colour with a hint of the red inside of it. So So here we are with the AK Tenebrous Grey. As I said, a couple of drops in the pot, don't wash it out. Now I add a couple of little spots on the back of the base to really cool it down, sort of behind where he's standing. And now at the very tips I cover in the Tenebrous Grey, so where I want it to be most dark I apply this and try and have 100% coverage on those very top tips, but leaving that pureness in the base. These are very short sharp bursts we're using here. As you can see, I don't use an expensive airbrush. This is a relatively cheap one from Amazon. I find it does exactly what I want it to do. Yes, you can have more precision and control with the more expensive ones, but for what I do at the moment, I don't need one. So the cheaper airbrush is fine for myself. And it's if you're starting out with an airbrush, don't go too expensive. You know, £30 on an airbrush and a compressor, which costs about £70. So for about £100, you can get an entire kit and give it a go. And this is the final step of doing the flame. As you can see, we've gone from that real bright yellow now to a nice rich fiery yellow and orange with a nice red hint to it. Didn't take too long. So next up, with some AK Light Rust, we're going to be highlighting the robes that we painted with the contrast paint. This is sort of like a squig orange, I think, the AK Light Rust. It's just a nice muted colour, and I've watered it down a little bit, so it's probably about a 50-50 mix, just so it's not too much of an intense colour. Apply a little bit to the brush, and all I'm doing here is I'm picking out the finer areas, almost like an edge highlight, and any of those raised areas, I just want it to be picked out in this lighter colour, just to give some definition from those shadows. I'll be adding some washes a bit later into those shadows just to deepen them down a bit more, but this is just our first little highlight. As you can see, I'm using a size 0 brush. These are the Raphael brushes. They're series 8404 sable ones. I use a size 1 or a size 0. The size 0 is just good all-rounder, but the size 1 is good for base coating in that. But I find the 00, which is a very thin one, is kind of hard to maintain a good point on them. Whereas the standard 0 brush maintains a good point, and you get enough paint on there, it stays kind of moist. The final highlight that I do for his cloak is with AK Pastel Peach. It's quite a desaturated orangey colour, and this is just minor highlights on those extreme raised areas. Just adding a little bit of this just to add that final bit of definition. Again, watered down a little bit, just so the paint flows well, and you get a good motion from the paint from the paintbrush onto the model, and it also has some of that translucency that we're looking for. So sadly, with the zenithal highlighting and stuff, we did make a little bit of a mess, but the first stage I'm going to be doing is just adding some glazes in with some watered down Tenebrous Grey. So this is 1 drop of paint to 5, 6, 7 drops of water. It's a very intense colour. I mean, you could use Nuln Oil straight out of the pot if you wanted to, or some Nuln Oil with a little bit of water into it, but I like this Tenebrous Grey colour. And all I'm doing here is I'm applying it like a wash, but making sure I haven't got a lot on the brush. And that one good rule to remember, and I cover this in many of my tutorials, is where you move the brush, when the brush leaves the model, that's where the most paint will be left. That's how you can push and pull paint around. So you're pushing the paint deep down into the shadows. If you're a lot sort of yeah, that's one key rule to remember. So you always see I'm working downwards towards the shadows. And I just work around the model here, applying this Tenebrous Grey into the recesses and into those areas I want to just darken down. And then once I've done that, as you can see, it's really added some definition into the shapes now. Once I've done this, I'm now going to move on to his cloak, and we're going for a muted magenta-y purple with this. So I'm using AK Dragon Blood, AK Purple and AK Magenta. In the meantime, what I did was I went around with the Tenebrous Grey and just base coated over everything again. It's not a necessary step, but I just like to get everything back to a neutral colour once again, and that can be black. I just like the Tenebrous Grey, but yeah, opportunity here now with a larger brush is I just base coat the entire cloak or cape in the Dragon Blood. Just be careful that you don't get any on any of the areas that you've already painted. So the idea of what I want to do here is I want to go from a very, very dark purple, which is the Dragon Blood, up to a very, very subtle magenta. As you can see, the magenta in that top part of the wet palette is really, really bright. I don't want to go that bright. I almost want to use that as just a final highlight. So we're going to be creating some mid-tones with mixing between the Dragon Blood magenta and purple colours, just to get some definition on his cloak. I didn't want the cloak too bright. I wanted the brightness to be on his robes that we've done orange, the flames, and a little bit of the gold to stand out. Once the Dragon Blood is dry, it does take a little bit of time. It's quite a wet paint. Just then add in, I create a sort of a 50-50 mix now, a mid-tone between the purple and the Dragon Blood, and I apply this with a little bit of water over all of the raised areas, leaving the Dragon Blood in the deepest recesses. And then, as you'll see from the tutorial now, I don't edit this in any way. I just work the way around the model, picking out those raised areas. And then I add more purple when I want to get brighter, and always covering with the highlights a smaller area than you previously did, so that you get that natural blending. So you can see I've got quite a thin paint now. It's almost like a heavy glaze that I can now push that paint down onto the bottom parts, so that we get a nice transition from the darkest colour up to the brightest colour. If you do find that you get too much of a jump, you can just apply that Dragon Blood as a glaze and work it back into the shadows. So if you get any areas that it brightens too quick, then you can push it back with some watered down Dragon Blood. That is an odd statement to say, but yeah, watered down AK Dragon Blood. So as you can see, I've gone another step brighter now with a bit more purple. One of my lights has gone out and I didn't notice. It does bring out the colours now that you can see. And I'm just picking out the areas that I want to be brighter. Very, very subtle. What I find sometimes works really well is you give the base coats a good couple of layers to get some nice intensity, and then do an initial highlight. And then you can use your edge highlighting to show the intention of colour, to show that there is colour there. It's very muted, but your highlights really pick out what that colour is. As you can see, I'm just applying some glaze just to bring out the intensity of that. I find when painting robes like this, there's a lot of not trial and error, but a lot of experimentation that I do. I start with the intentions of, I know what I want it to look like. I have this idea and I know what colours to use, which is a big part of the problem we have as painters, not often knowing what colours to use and what colours go with what. But once you've settled on how you want to do it, then yes, you could practice on another model, or you can just do some experimentation, and sometimes they lead to amazing things and amazing discoveries, especially if you use different paint brands, random colours here and there, mixing reds with purples or adding oranges in there. Desaturating colours with flesh tones is a really good way of showing wear and tear, which is what I show on some of the models that I do, especially for Nurgle. Adding in flesh tones gives a desaturated look and acts as a different way of highlighting. See, we didn't even really use the magenta. I've just used the purple to get it brighter and brighter, and a little bit of desaturation just to get the viewer to see it, the cloak, as purple, but actually we didn't really add much colour than those two darker tones that we've got. You could of course keep going brighter. If you wanted to have a more magenta feel, you could just keep adding more layers of the magenta mix into it. So onto the metallics. So for the silvers, I'm using AK gunmetal. and I'm also using AK Metal Blue for the sort of metal band that goes across the Pyrocaster's eyes. Then for the gold, I use AK Rusty Gold with a highlight of AK Old Gold. Now, doing metallics, pretty straightforward here, just standard base coating, nothing special here that I'm doing. Just making sure to take care now. I've got using my 0 size brush, a little bit of paint on there, and I just work around picking out all the gold areas, all the silver areas, and then doing some highlighting. What I do now is I just add a couple of lines with the rusty gold, just so it adds a little bit of texture and just breaks the colour up. So it's just a couple of square vertical line and a horizontal line, just a couple, maybe 2 millimeters in from each edge. It's a little bit of freehand, it's completely optional. I noticed in the sort of Cities of Sigmar boxes you get a load of transfers, so this could be an opportunity to apply a few transfers on his cloak, just to give it just some definition, or some your character a bit of backstory or whatever. But I'm just applying it a little bit here, and then what I do is I thin down some Tenebrous Grey and just go over each of the edges with that Tenebrous Grey to sort of outline the freehand that we've just done. So here we're going to be using the metallic blue colour just to paint in the band that's going across. Oh, sorry, this is just the gunmetal. In a bit I'll use the metallic blue to paint across the band in on the Pyrocaster's eyes. You could just use a silver colour, like a bright silver, and then go over the top of it with maybe like Frostheart blue, something like that, to get a similar sort of effect. But I just like this metallic blue. It came with the pack of paints that I ordered when I bought the metallic set from AK. It's a fun little colour, and I wanted to use it here as just an experiment to see what it looked like. It's very subtle, but it just adds a little bit different definition to the model. So one of the final parts now is painting the skin. For this I'm using AK Sickly Pink, but to be honest any light flesh tone will do here. I find Sickly Pink it's a fun little colour. It takes well to various coloured washes, and it's good for a base coat and to provide a good highlight as well because it's quite bright. It does take a couple of coats because it is I guess what Warhammer would call a layer paint, so it's not as thick as a base paint. But just take care applying this over his hands and his face. On this hand there is he's got some jewellery, he's got a bit of bling. Don't worry if you overpaint it, because you can always go back in after you've done all the washes and highlights and just pick those out in silver and gold. Once you've done a couple of coats and it's dry, I then apply some Reikland Fleshshade all over the hands and the face, giving it a good 10-15 minutes to dry. There's a little bit of leather work on the guy, on his sort of rope belt, and I just use a few colours for this. I just use leather brown and saddle brown from AK, and these are only almost dry brushed on. just to give a little bit of definition. Just apply the highlight to the gold areas now with some AK Old Gold, just little edge highlights just to bring out some of the definition of the shapes. Not too bright, as I mentioned, we want to keep our brightness down to the flames and the robe. I like the idea of the golds and the silvers and that being a little bit worn, especially if he's around fire, a bit smoke damaged, so dullness is quite a handy thing. So just subtle edge highlights with your bright gold. So just back to the skin, I wanted to add some deeper redness to it. So I used Carroburg Crimson, but watered down. So I had a drop of the paint onto the wet palette and then add a drop of water. So it's almost a 50-50 mix. And this just gives some redness to the skin, gives it a bit more definition. This is optional. but I find a watered down Carroburg crimson over the flesh gives a nice natural look. You could use a heavily watered down Vulpus pink as well, but it has to be heavily watered down because it's such a pure colour. And then just for his boots, I mix some AK Tenebrous Grey and some AK Intense White together just to make a mid-tone and to do some rough highlights around his feet. Obviously they're going to be covered with the flame, so just some small highlights just to show some definition. I then highlight the face and the hands just using the sickly pink just to bring back some definition around his face, on his nose and his chin, and just on the sort of leading edges of the fingers, like the knuckles, just where the skin would be a bit taut. But this is just with a little bit of thinned down sickly pink. And with that, the bulk of the work is now done. So I attach him to his base, just using a little bit of super glue. I then get some Tenebrous Grey, a little bit watered down, and just paint in the sort of charcoaly rock that's sort of at the end of his magical spear. And then I just do a few little glazes with some heavily watered down Tenebrous Grey just on the very tips of the flames, just to make those a little bit darker, to sell the smoke effect that we're going for. So in about an hour, using the airbrush, we've painted a really cool looking model, and a load of these skills that we've used can be transferred across to dozens of other models. How we've done our flames can be widely used. The airbrush to get the robes done. It's a really good way of batch painting models as well, but also getting really good high-end effects for your characters to spend a little bit of extra time. I mean, this is only an hour. We've got quite a decent finish here, some good range of colours, everything's well defined. is also the opportunity just to have a look around the model now and to see how it all looks, to use your washes, like your Tenebrous Grey washes, just to darken down some areas that might be a bit more in shadow than you thought, just to get some more definition from those highs and lows. With model painting, we need lots of contrast. We need dark darks and bright brights, and we're painting on very small areas, so they have to be well defined but not look too garish. And using washes and glazes helps with that, where you can push paint into those darker areas just to help sell areas are in shadow, and then the darker areas help make your bright areas look brighter, and your bright areas make your dark areas look darker. There you go, yeah, just adding a few more of these bits of Tenebrous Grey wash just into all of those recesses to help get some definition on his hands. And once you're done, then that's the model finished. So I hope you've enjoyed painting along with me on this one. He's a cool looking model, and as I said, all of these things that we've learned can be used across the entire range and make other models look absolutely spectacular. So yeah, as always, give me some comments of what you think. I appreciate you following me. It means a lot and helps me keep on painting, really. The more followers, the more I can do. So yeah, happy painting, my fellow painters.